So we need to know the difference between damper setting and drag factor. I'm sure you guys have heard both terms tossed around, and often they're used interchangeably. What we want to do is start to take a look at, well, what's most important and why do we actually need to know how to use it. So when we're talking damper setting, and as I use the term damper setting, what I'm talking about is moving this wheel right here. This is my damper setting. When I'm talking drag factor, I'm calibrating what's on the monitor using a function that we have in this computer here. So let's start talking damper setting. So damper setting, when I move and adjust this wheel, what I'm doing is letting more or less air into and out of the flywheel that's inside here. So you can see on top of this flywheel we have a cage, a nice mesh cage that allows air into and out of the flywheel. So if that gets dirty, it's going to start to affect how much air can flow in. Now, why am I talking about whether or not this is getting dirty? Because if I'm simply worrying about setting my damper setting, and I always row on a 5, right? We've got this adjusted to a 5. Let's say every machine I get on, I set it to a 5. Well, some machines have more dirt, less dirt, they've been used more or less. What that means is that more or less air is going to flow in every time I change machines. So a 5 on this machine may not be a 5 on another machine. So that's where drag factor comes in, is in helping us calibrate the machine itself. So if I'm going to use a 5, I want to make sure that I'm calibrating to understand what drag factor I'm actually rowing at and what the feel is going to be, because a 5 on this machine and a 5 on another machine won't feel the same, but the same drag factor on those machines will feel the same. Now, what really matters is how your engine works. So if I take this up to a 10, I'm letting a lot of air into this flywheel, which means that it's grabbing a lot of air, making the stroke feel heavier. Now, if I take it down to a 1, I'm pinching it off, letting less air in, which means that that flywheel can spin more freely, and so you can take a lot more strokes with more ease. So what matters most is really how your engine works. If you're somebody that can let your heart rate run through the roof, and you have no problem with that, you can just live at a 200 and no problem, then you're going to want to live at a lower damper setting. If you're somebody like Dave that loves getting on the power and you can just sit at a 10 forever, taking very few strokes per minute but really getting onto that stroke, then you're going to be fine and you want to live up at a higher damper setting. So that's just a general principle for you, or a way to look at it. So it's not that a 10 is better than a 1, it just matters how your engine works. So 10 doesn't necessarily mean you're more powerful. I've seen some very big guys that row more efficiently at a 3 than they do at a 10. And it just takes playing with it, honestly. So getting back to talking a little bit about how we actually calibrate the machine, I'm going to have Dave show us how to do that. So I'm going to just set our damper to a 5 just to test it out. All right, so we're going to have Dave strap in. All right, so if we're looking at this monitor, we're going to go to more options. Then we're going to go to display drag factor. And all we're going to do is have Dave start taking strokes. They don't have to be hard strokes, but they do have to be technically proficient because the machine does pay attention to your technique. All right, so go ahead and relax. So we had our damper setting set to a 5, and you can see the drag factor is 132. Now, if we pulled out another machine and had him start rowing at a 5, it probably wouldn't be at a 132. It might be at a 120 or a high 130. So if we want to calibrate this, let's say that on a regular basis, Dave knows that he rows with a drag factor of 117. We're going to start to adjust this damper setting on the side now and start taking strokes. So right now we're at a 132, but we want to get to a 117. So I'm going to take this damper setting, and if it's above 117, I'm just going to drop it down, and Dave's going to start rowing again. So go ahead and start rowing, Dave. All right, so you can see we brought it down to a 120. I'm going to drop it a little bit more. There we're down to a 119, 116, 114, and there's 117. Go ahead and relax. Good, 118. So you can see that's how we're going to go ahead and calibrate the drag factor. Now, what's important to know is where you train most efficiently. So you find an erg that you work on regularly and figure out what works best for you. Do you prefer letting that stroke rate run nice and high? If so, you're probably going to be around a 3 on the damper. If you like letting that stroke rate run low, you're going to let it sit a little higher on the damper setting. And what you're going to do is on that machine, find the drag factor that's associated with that damper setting. That way, anytime you get onto a new machine, let's say you're traveling and you get onto another erg, you can actually find out, all right, how do I row at a 117 on this machine instead of just setting it to an 8, where that machine might be a lot dirtier, have trouble pulling air into the flywheel, and might make it more challenging for you to actually get that same feel. So you might just feel like crap on that machine, but it's not actually you, it's the fact that that machine doesn't feel the same. Now the one thing to keep in mind for those of you competing, for me at least, as I've been competing the past 3 years, every time with the team we start to compete, they don't let us change the damper setting. It's almost always set at a 5 or 6. Now Dave was saying that for individuals, sometimes they're allowed to change that damper setting. So I think it's healthy to train at a little bit of both. Train where you work most efficiently, but also learn to train at that 5 or a 6, which on a brand new machine for a drag factor is probably going to be a high 120, maybe a low 130. So it's important to train both so that you know what it's going to feel like when you get to regionals, when you get to games. All right, if my damper setting's at a 5, I know how this is going to play out. If I can affect it, great. I'm going to move my damper setting and hopefully set my drag factor so that I can work more efficiently and actually move this machine.